The most painful thing you can do to a narcissist is absolutely nothing. Not arguing, not exposing them, not proving your point, just walking away. And that's exactly why it works. If this is resonating with you, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what would change in my life if I stopped trying to win and started choosing peace? And if you're ready for that shift, stay with me. Narcissists feed on reaction because their entire psychological structure depends on external validation to regulate a deeply unstable sense of self. At the core, there is an emptiness, a fragile identity that cannot sustain itself without constant reinforcement. Attention becomes their oxygen. It does not matter whether that attention is positive or negative. What matters is intensity. Your anger, your tears, your frustration, your attempts to explain yourself. All of it confirms that they still occupy space in your mind. That confirmation temporarily stabilizes their ego. When you react, you are signaling that they have impact, that they have power, that they can still provoke emotion. For someone who fears insignificance more than anything, that reaction is proof of existence. This is why arguments often escalate in circular patterns. The goal is not resolution. The goal is stimulation. Conflict provides drama, and drama provides attention. Even your attempts to defend yourself can be reframed by them as engagement. When you try to prove your point, they experience it as relevance. When you cry, they experience it as control. When you plead to be understood, they experience it as superiority. The emotional charge you bring into the interaction becomes a supply line. Silence, however, interrupts this supply. When there is no reaction, there is no emotional feedback loop to exploit. The absence of response creates psychological discomfort because it denies them the evidence that they matter. Without your reaction, they are left alone with their own internal instability, and that is deeply unsettling. Walking away removes the stimulus that regulates them. It communicates without words that they no longer have influence. And influence is what they crave more than love, more than connection, more than truth. Your reaction sustains their illusion of significance, but your indifference forces them to confront the possibility that they are no longer central in your emotional world. Walking away removes their sense of control because narcissistic dynamics are fundamentally built on power, not partnership. Control is the mechanism through which they regulate insecurity. When they can predict your reactions, trigger your emotions, or pull you back into conversation at will, it reassures them that they are still in charge of the narrative. Even conflict can feel like control to them because if they can upset you, they can move you. If they can make you defend yourself, they can position themselves as the judge. The relationship becomes less about connection and more about dominance. Control often shows up subtly. It can look like provoking jealousy to see if you react. It can look like withdrawing affection to make you chase. It can look like gaslighting to make you question your memory. Each tactic has the same underlying purpose: to destabilize you just enough that you turn toward them for clarity, reassurance, or resolution. The moment you seek something from them emotionally, they regain leverage. Your confusion becomes their advantage. When you walk away, that leverage disappears. You are no longer available for manipulation. You are no longer participating in the emotional tug of war. This is deeply unsettling for someone who relies on predictability in others to feel secure. If they cannot reach you, they cannot orchestrate the emotional environment. If they cannot provoke you, they cannot measure their impact. The power dynamic shifts instantly because you are no longer responding to their cues. This loss of control creates what is known as narcissistic injury. It is not simply disappointment, it is a threat to their constructed identity. They believed they could access you at any time. They believed they could rewrite the story, pull you back in, or reassert dominance whenever necessary. Walking away challenges that belief. It demonstrates autonomy. It communicates that your emotional state is no longer dependent on them. And for someone who equates control with worth, that realization is profoundly destabilizing. Silence creates narcissistic injury because it removes the mirror they rely on to maintain their inflated self image. At the core of narcissism is a fragile ego wrapped in grandiosity. They construct an identity that must be constantly reflected back to them through admiration, fear, desire, or even anger. Your emotional responses act as that mirror. When you react, you are confirming that they are significant enough to move you. That confirmation protects them from confronting their own insecurity. Narcissistic injury occurs when that inflated self perception is threatened. It is not a minor bruise to pride, it is an existential threat to how they see themselves. When you go silent, you are no longer reflecting importance back to them. There is no outrage to argue with, no tears to dismiss, no explanations to twist. The absence of reaction creates ambiguity, and ambiguity is intolerable for someone who needs constant validation. Silence forces them into a space where they cannot measure their impact. What makes silence especially powerful is that it denies them a role. Narcissistic dynamics thrive on engagement. They can handle being the villain, the victim, or the hero as long as they remain central. Silence removes them from the storyline. It communicates emotional disengagement without confrontation. And because it is non dramatic, it cannot be easily reframed. They cannot argue with it, they cannot gaslight it, they cannot win against it. This lack of access often triggers escalating behavior. They may attempt to provoke you more aggressively, send messages designed to hook you, or portray themselves as wounded. These reactions are attempts to restore the mirror. The injury is not about losing you as a person, it is about losing the reflection you provided. Without that reflection, their internal instability becomes louder. Silence exposes the gap between the image they project and the reality they fear. And that exposure is deeply uncomfortable because it strips away the illusion of unquestioned importance. No contact disrupts the trauma bond because it interrupts the cycle of intermittent reinforcement that keeps you psychologically attached. Trauma bonds are not built on love, they are built on unpredictability. The relationship alternates between intense affection and emotional withdrawal, validation and criticism, closeness and rejection. That inconsistency creates a powerful attachment pattern in your nervous system. When something feels scarce and unpredictable, the brain works harder to secure it. The brief moments of warmth or approval feel amplified because they follow pain. Relief becomes addictive. Over time, your body becomes conditioned to the cycle. Anxiety rises during distance or conflict, and dopamine spikes when connection is restored. This biochemical loop mirrors addiction. You are not just missing the person, you are craving the emotional relief that comes when the tension temporarily dissolves. The narcissistic dynamic depends on this loop. The push pull keeps you invested, constantly trying to get back to the good version of them. You start chasing resolution, clarity, or affection, believing that if you just try harder, stability will return. No contact breaks that conditioning. By removing access entirely, you stop participating in the cycle of reward and punishment. At first, this can feel unbearable. The silence may increase anxiety because your nervous system expects the usual pattern: conflict followed by reconciliation. Without the reconciliation, your brain protests. This is withdrawal. It can feel like longing, guilt, or even panic, but that discomfort is evidence that the bond was trauma-based, not healthy. With consistent no contact, the nervous system begins to recalibrate. The highs and lows level out. Your body slowly learns that peace does not require chaos first. The absence of unpredictable reinforcement allows emotional regulation to return. You start responding to life based on reality rather than anticipation of the next emotional swing. By stepping away fully, you deny the cycle the energy it needs to survive. And without the cycle, the trauma bond weakens, allowing clarity to replace confusion and stability to replace craving. Indifference wounds deeper than confrontation because confrontation still signals emotional investment. When you argue, defend yourself, expose their lies, or try to make them understand the damage they caused, you are communicating that they still matter enough to fight. Even anger carries attachment. It says, "You affected me." For someone who measures worth by impact, that reaction reinforces their significance. They may resist your words, deny responsibility, or flip the script, but internally, your engagement confirms that they remain central in your emotional world. Indifference, however, sends a very different message. It communicates emotional neutrality. There is no charge, no urgency, no need to correct or convince. When you become indifferent, you are no longer trying to win, and you are no longer trying to be understood. That absence of effort is deeply destabilizing because it implies detachment. It suggests that their behavior no longer has the power to hook you. For a narcissistic personality, being disliked is often more tolerable than being dismissed. If you hate them, they can frame themselves as misunderstood or victimized. If you argue, they can frame themselves as dominant or superior. But if you simply do not care, there is no narrative to manipulate. Indifference strips away drama, and drama is the stage on which they perform. Without it, there is no spotlight. Psychologically, indifference challenges their belief that they are exceptional. If they were truly extraordinary, you would still be reacting. Your calm detachment contradicts their internal story of being unforgettable, irresistible, or powerful. It forces a confrontation with ordinariness, something they work hard to avoid. Indifference is not coldness, it is emotional closure. It reflects that you have processed the hurt and stepped out of the power struggle. When there is no emotional return on their behavior, their tactics lose effectiveness. The dynamic collapses because it depends on your participation, and nothing communicates the end of that participation more clearly than your genuine lack of reaction. They expect pursuit, not detachment, because the dynamic has always trained them to believe that you will come back. Narcissistic relationships often follow a predictable script. Tension builds, conflict erupts, distance happens, and then reconciliation occurs because you reach out, explain yourself, apologize, or try to fix it. Over time, this pattern conditions them to assume permanence. No matter how poorly they behave, no matter how dismissive or manipulative they become, the underlying belief is that you will not truly leave. You may protest, you may cry, you may threaten to walk away, but eventually you re-engage. That re-engagement reinforces their sense of indispensability. Pursuit validates their power. When you chase closure, ask for clarity, or try to repair the bond, it confirms that they are still desired. Even if they act indifferent, the knowledge that you are thinking about them strengthens their position psychologically. It tells them they still occupy emotional real estate in your life. that expectation of pursuit becomes part of their internal script. They push, you pull closer. They withdraw, you lean in. The imbalance feeds their sense of control. Detachment disrupts that script completely. It is quiet, steady, and non-dramatic. There is no grand announcement, no emotional spectacle, just consistent absence. When you detach, you stop negotiating for scraps of validation. You stop trying to decode mixed signals. You stop waiting for them to become who they briefly pretended to be. This is unexpected because it does not follow the established rhythm of the relationship. The shock of detachment lies in its finality. Pursuit keeps hope alive, hope that they can return whenever they choose. Detachment removes that safety net. It signals that you are no longer orbiting around them. For someone accustomed to being chased, this reversal can feel disorienting. The emotional supply they assumed was secure suddenly becomes uncertain. And uncertainty is uncomfortable for someone who relies on predictability in others to maintain their sense of dominance. Your healing is the ultimate power shift because it changes the focus from them to you. In a narcissistic dynamic, your energy is constantly directed outward, analyzing their moods, managing their reactions, anticipating conflict, replaying conversations, trying to earn stability. Your emotional bandwidth becomes consumed by survival. Even when you are angry or planning to leave, they remain the center of your internal world. That centrality is power. As long as your thoughts orbit around them, the dynamic still exists. Healing redirects that energy inward. Instead of asking why they behaved a certain way, you begin asking why you tolerated it. Instead of waiting for validation, you start building self-trust. Instead of scanning for their approval, you start listening to your own boundaries. This internal shift is subtle but profound. You are no longer operating from reaction. You are operating from self-awareness. When you regulate your nervous system and break the trauma bond, you become less emotionally reactive. Their attempts to provoke no longer land the same way. Their silence no longer feels like punishment. Their breadcrumbs no longer feel like hope. That emotional steadiness removes their leverage. Power in these dynamics was never about dominance, it was about influence. Healing reduces their influence over your mood, your decisions, and your sense of worth. As you rebuild your identity outside the relationship, you also begin to see the illusion more clearly. The pedestal you once placed them on dissolves. You recognize manipulation where you once saw complexity. You recognize inconsistency where you once saw mystery. Clarity weakens fantasy, and fantasy was often the glue that held the attachment together. The greatest shift happens when your happiness is no longer contingent on their behavior. When your peace does not depend on their apology, their return, or their acknowledgement, the dynamic collapses. You are no longer trying to win. You are no longer trying to prove. You are simply living in alignment with yourself. And that quiet alignment represents a transfer of power back to where it always belonged. Revenge isn't retaliation. It's reclaiming your peace because retaliation keeps you psychologically tied to the very dynamic you are trying to escape. When you focus on getting even, exposing them, or making them feel the pain they caused you, your energy remains entangled with theirs. Your actions may look powerful on the surface, but internally you are still reacting. The emotional cord is still attached. Retaliation is fueled by hurt, and hurt keeps the nervous system activated. In that activated state, they still occupy space in your thoughts, your conversations, your decisions. Narcissistic dynamics thrive on reaction, whether positive or negative. If you attempt to hurt them back, you are stepping back into the arena. You are proving that they can still provoke you into action, Even revenge can become a form of supply because it confirms significance. It says, "You mattered enough for me to respond." For someone who fears irrelevance, that confirmation softens the blow of any consequences they face. Reclaiming your peace is different. It is not about teaching them a lesson. It is about ending your participation. Peace means emotional regulation. It means you no longer feel compelled to monitor their life, decode their motives, or rehearse imaginary conversations. It means your self-worth is no longer negotiated through their approval or rejection. That shift removes the emotional intensity that once bound you to them. When you reclaim your peace, you also reclaim your time, your focus, and your identity. You invest in friendships that feel reciprocal. You pursue goals that reflect your values. You rebuild trust in your own perceptions. The energy that once fueled conflict now fuels growth. This quiet rebuilding does not create drama, but it creates stability.